Correction. Israelis are at war, not Israelites and not Israel. It's about time. You see, the Gentiles are getting to know the power of the Israelites, the God of the Israelites. Let's take a listen to Fox News confirming the Rothschild-Balfour Declaration for a state of Israel. This is not ordained of the Most High Yahweh in the name of His only begotten Son, Yahweh Shai HaMashiach, but it is by human Gentile hands to hand over the land of the Israelites to the Gentiles.
Hundreds are dead and thousands injured following the horrific Hamas attack against Israel. But the conflict today, as we know, it's been stirring for years.
Yeah, so let's go off the ball once more to understand the history and how this started, some of the background between the state of Israel, Palestinians, and how it erupted over this past weekend. In fact, while we come at this very humbly, it's complex and there are different sets of facts. We think a little bit of historical context can help us understand what's going on in Israel.
Yeah, you could spend a whole semester at a graduate seminar course attempting to break all this down and understand it. We're going to do it for you in 5 minutes as best we can. So the area known as Israel now was controlled by the Ottoman Empire for 400 years, hundreds of years. It was a part of that sprawling empire. Of course, the Ottoman Empire joined with the Germans in World War I, and that led to its downfall.
That really solidified its downfall. It had begun to fall apart prior to World War I, but the Ottoman Empire was huge and established stability across the entire region from Africa down through the Middle East, Turkey, and into Europe. But as Pete pointed out, following World War I, the stability that was provided by the Ottoman Empire disintegrated.
And it was replaced by a different form of stability in the British Mandate. So the British government showed interest in establishing a Jewish state. There was an agreement called the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which eventually led to the British Mandate, where there was flourishing and coalescing. You look at images of Jerusalem and Israel back then, but there was still a lot of conflict, just like when the Romans were there in the biblical era. The Jewish people wanted their own state.
Well, speaking of the biblical era, this entire region had largely been tribal. It didn't resemble anything we think of in the modern mind as the nation state. But following World War I, Britain, through the League of Nations, was given control of the area, and they begin to carve up the map. They begin to create Jordan and Syria and the modern conception of the nation state.
I can't remember the name of the agreement, but a lot of the consternation across the Middle East goes back to Winston Churchill and others who drew a lot of straight lines across previous tribal areas, which led to nation states that have different groups of, I think of Iraq, with different groups of people. You certainly see that in Israel. Now, there was a very tumultuous period in Europe between 1922 and 1947. A lot of anti-Semitism, regimes predicated on the destruction of the Jewish people, most significantly Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime, which in the Holocaust that led to the death of 6 million Jews. A lot of Jews left Europe and came back to Israel.
And of course, Jews leave Europe, head back to Israel. There's already Palestinians living in Israel, and thus begins your tensions. Let's focus in on the geography. Pete's done a great job this morning going to the maps and explaining the current environment. But this is a little bit of a scope out, but still focusing on Israel. Israel, roughly the size of New Jersey. Two largely Palestinian areas the West Bank, along the West Bank of the Jordan River, and the Gaza Strip, where our focus is this morning and throughout this latest incident.
And a lot of focus of the past has been the so-called West Bank. Others will call it Judea and Samaria, the historic homeland of the Jewish people as well. So words are a big part of this complication inside that as well. So we've talked about the Gaza Strip a lot. Small area, lots of people. You look at the West Bank, just to give you a sense, this is where Jerusalem is. And so you've got West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem, and a lot of the religious sites were captured in 1967, which we'll get to. But when you think of the West Bank, there's a lot of sites in this location of significance to Jews and Christians. You've got the traditional baptismal site of Jesus along the Jordan River. You've got the walls of Jericho that are there. You've got Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus. So a lot of significance in the Judea and Samaria.
A good comparison people are making for the West Bank to conceptualize geographically is Delaware. With a third of the population, roughly the same geographic size. But really quickly, just to put that in context, look how small Gaza Strip is, where our focus is today. 140 square miles, 2 million population.
Yeah, compare the sizes, and the populations are pretty similar. It's extremely dense.
The complexity only gets worse in terms of the tensions over the past 75 years in the existence of Israel. Israel, as we point out, as Jews begin to remigrate back to Israel, 1947 is a marking point after World War II, where there's the first attempt, and it ultimately is successful, in creating the state of Israel. Where there's the first attempt, and it ultimately is successful in creating the state of Israel.
And then ultimately, soon thereafter, there was a war, the Arab-Israeli war, where effectively you see Egypt, you see Jordan, they all coalesce on saying, no, we don't want Jews at a state of Israel here. Jordan being very significant. Jordan moved all the way up to Jerusalem and controlled much of that until 1967. So it was disputed from the very beginning and has been fought over in the modern sense of the nation state since 1947. The U.S., by the way, the first country to recognize Israel, 11 minutes into their existence, Harry Truman did so.
That war, which followed the declaration, essentially establishes the state of Israel in 1948. And then, Pete, as we pointed out, wars throughout time, but with largely state actors. We're talking about Jordan, we're talking about Egypt, we're talking about Syria, that have flashed up since the 40s in two main points. The 1967 Six-Day War was one of those, and in fact is one of those that many people are pointing back to today as a marking point of how extreme what we're watching take place today is.
It was a really, really big one, because the state of Israel, a lot of people thought, okay, its enemies wanted to wipe it off its map. Instead, it went on a counteroffensive and captured Gaza, captured Judea and Samaria in the West Bank, captured the Golan Heights in the north, captured East Jerusalem. They were on the Temple Mount and quickly gave it back. But ultimately, that redrew the lines, and it allowed Israel the opportunity to effectively control these areas for their own security, something that changed in 2005 and is pertinent to our discussion when they gave the Gaza Strip over to the Palestinian Authority.
So you brought this up earlier this morning. You talked about Bibi Netanyahu immediately said, this is war. That war word had specific meaning, not an operation, specifically a war. Why? Because it's 50 years since a war. 1973, the Yom Kippur War, is the last time that type of language, that type of mindset approach has really defined the Palestinian and Israeli confrontation. But after seeing 600, we're right now, by the way, at 600 civilian children, women, grandmothers dead, and this has been declared war.
And this basically settled the nation-state aspect of this. And after that, you saw intifadas, or uprisings, led by the PLO, led by Hamas, led by terrorist organizations, trying to achieve their goals inside their regions. You saw buses blowing up inside, and that's why you saw border fences put up across Jerusalem and in Gaza, and operations that led to deaths of Israelis and Palestinians.
And that brings us to today, everyone talking about not just the horrific nature of it, but the historical nature of this conflict in time between these two.
Absolutely.
And what it could mean for the future.
As prophesied in the word of the Most High, Zechariah chapter 12, verse 3. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. Speaking of all of the Gentiles, that is, all that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. Luke 21 and 24, Yahweh Shai Moshiach said, and they, the Israelites, shall fall by the edge of the sword or many weapons, and shall be led away captive into all nations, that is, all the Gentiles. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. That is, until the Most High determines to judge the Gentiles. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 4. Zechariah prophesies judgment of the Israelites' enemy. Behold, the Lord will cast her out, and he will smite her power in the sea, and she shall be devoured with fire. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 5. Ashkelon shall see it and fear. Gaza also shall see it and be very sorrowful. And Ekron, for her expectation, shall be ashamed. And the king, or the leader, shall perish from Gaza, and Ashkelon shall not be inhabited. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 6. And a bastard, that is a foreigner's, shall dwell in Ashdod, and I, the Lord, that is, will cut off the pride of the Philistines. The Philistines are your present-day Palestinians. Now let's get some more on Gaza. Amos. Thus saith the Lord, Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they carried away captive the whole captivity, speaking of the Israelites, to deliver them up to Edom, Esau, Idumeah, who is the so-called white man today. Zephaniah 2 and verse 4. For Gaza shall be forsaken, that is, abandoned or deserted, and Ashkelon a desolation, in ruins a waste. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. And we have an eclipse coming up on the 14th. What will the eclipse be a sign for among the Gentiles on the 14th of this month? We shall see.
Citizens of Israel, we are at war, not in an operation or in rounds, but at war.
Correction. Israelis are at war, not Israelites and not Israel.
It's 67 words long, it's 100 years old, and it changed the course of history for the Middle East and the Jewish people. The Balfour Declaration, the expression of the British government's support for a Jewish home in Palestine, was sent by British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to the second Lord Rothschild. I'm here in Buckinghamshire at Waddesdon Manor to speak with the fourth Lord Rothschild about the Balfour Declaration, what it means for Britain, for the Jewish people, and the Rothschild family.
The Foreign Office, November the 2nd, 1917. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's Government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet.
So it's possibly the most famous letter in modern Jewish history, and it begins with 3 words. Dear Lord Rothschild. Why was it that this letter was sent by the Foreign Secretary to your great-uncle Walter?
It's an interesting question because he was really interested in ornithology, although he became interested in Zionism. I think the reason was this, that it was primarily a movement from Eastern Europe, but they didn't clarify who was in charge of that movement. And in addition, it was after all in Great Britain. So they felt that the Rothschild family should be the one to whom it was addressed. And Walter was Lord Rothschild, and he was a Zionist. And those really are the background reasons.
So Walter received the Balfour Declaration, and I have a copy here. And I wonder if I could possibly ask you to read it for us.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. I'm going to put on my spectacles to make sure I read it accurately. His Majesty's Government view with favour the establishment of Palestine as a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours, Arthur Balfour.
And here it is, the Balfour Declaration. What do you feel when you see it here?
I genuinely feel it's one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of the Jewish people. If you think it took 3,000 years to get to this.
And of course, the Rothschild family then as now filled two roles, because it wasn't just a leader of diaspora Jewry, it also played a very significant role in the early years of the establishment of the pioneer communities in Israel as well. I just want to revisit for a moment your cousin Dorothy, who you mentioned, who at an extraordinarily young age, still in her teens, played such a critical role as a go-between and a facilitator for Chaim Weizmann. Can you say a little bit about
Well,
that?
she married my cousin Jimmy when she was 17.
So this is your cousin Dorothy, Dolly.
Yep, Mrs. James Rothschild.
And from her teenage years onwards, she was a major supporter of Israel, wasn't she?
Major supporter. I mean, she worshipped her husband, who'd been deeply committed, son of Baron Edmore. It was due to him, I think, that she became interested. But once she became interested, she became passionately interested. After his death, she became even more committed. She just wanted to carry out his wishes and what he cared deeply about. And you can read letters from her to Weizmann and from Weizmann to her when she was only 17. And what she did, which was crucially important, was to connect up Weizmann with the British establishment.
I think she also trained him in how to deal. She helped educate how to
and it's
conduct
extraordinary
himself.
at that age, but she did sort of tell Weizmann, you know, how to kind of integrate, how to insert himself into British establishment life, which he learned very quickly.
Definitions: ish as applied and combined with the noun Jew. We have Jewish defined. According to the Oxford Dictionary, Jewish is an adjective that means relating to, associated with, or denoting Jews or Judaism. Example is the Jewish people. Another example is, many Jews have told me that being a Jew is not about believing in the Jewish religion. No one can ever criticize the Jewish diaspora for asserting Israel's right to exist. Or the problem comes when people equate the Israeli policy with the Jewish community. Note that there is no origin to this definition. The Cambridge Dictionary, the second witness, both are adjectives, is not gradable. Now, not gradable means an adjective that has no comparative or superlative form. And so the definition goes on to say, it is of or related to Jews. And Jew is short for Judah. Note the source references exist for this word. And the secondary meaning of the adjective for the United Kingdom and US is connected with people whose traditional religion is Judaism. Example sentence: New York has one of the largest Jewish communities in the world. And the thesaurus shows synonyms and related words. These related synonyms all relate to this particular word. Now let's move on to Israeli defined, because the people in the current state of Israel refer to themselves as Israeli. So let's find out what an Israeli is. Israeli, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is an adjective. As an adjective, it means relating to the modern country of Israel. Example sentences: in terms of wider Israeli society, however, the end of the Cold War probably had a greater impact. It's also a noun, and as a noun is defined as a native or inhabitant of Israel or a person of Israeli descent. Note that there is no origin to this definition. The Cambridge Dictionary defines it as an adjective. It means belonging to or relating to Israel or its people. Examples are Israeli exports or an Israeli newspaper. There's a host of synonyms under the thesaurus. As a noun in the Cambridge Dictionary, the word means a person from Israel. The thesaurus is the same as the above entry. So what this is indicating is Israeli is a resident in the land. That's all it means. Israeli is a resident in the land. Moving on. Joel chapter 3 verse 2. I, speaking of the Lord, that is, will also gather all nations, that is, all Gentiles, and bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, which means judgment, and will plead with, that is, condemn and punish them there for my people and for my heritage, Israel, the Israelites, that is, whom they have scattered among the nations, among the Gentiles, and parted my land. That is what this whole Israeli and Palestinian conflict is all about. And the world is going to get involved in it as well. And that is going to bring about this prophecy in Joel chapter 3. All praises to Yahweh, Bahashem Hamashach Yahushai.